I sat in the cramped compartment of the transport shuttle. I checked my gear for the third time, the motions automatic, born from years of muscle memory. My hands moved over the dark matte surface of my helmet, my fingers tracing the scratches that lined the visor. Each mark told a story. A close call, a battle survived, a memento that survival was a game of inches. Across from me, Sergeant Keller sat with his back rigid against the bulkhead, eyes focused on nothing in particular. His fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the grip of his rifle. Keller was one of the few left from the original team, his nerves still raw from our last mission. He was a good soldier, reliable, competent, but I could see the fear eating away at him. We all had it. No one escaped Mars without scars, and those who did weren't worth a damn in the field. "ETA 3 minutes, the pilot announced. The shuttle bucked as it hit turbulence, the thrusters straining against the thin Martian atmosphere. I looked around at the rest of the team. Corporal Cruz, a demolitions expert with a scarred face that matched his reputation for getting the job done, was rechecking the charges in his pack. He caught my eye and nodded once. Keller shifted uncomfortably as if the nod had reminded him that survival was about more than just staying alive. We were heading into Dome 17, a quarantine zone. The last report from inside said that the colony's biofilters had failed. Without those, the bacteria would spread unchecked, turning flesh into a breeding ground for its next mutation. The thought of it made my skin crawl. "Eyes sharp," I said, breaking the silence. "This isn't a rescue mission. We're here to get samples and get out. No heroics. Anyone tries to play the good guy, and you'll be left behind." Keller swallowed hard but nodded. Cruz gave me a grim smile. He'd been with me long enough to know the drill. No one gets out alive by being a hero. The shuttle lurched as it began its descent. Through the small window I could see the remains of the colony below. A cluster of domes connected by fragile-looking tunnels, half buried in red dust. The larger, intact domes towered over the smaller, shattered ones like sentinels watching over a graveyard. The landing was rough, the shuttle's skids sinking into the soft Martian soil. The dome came into view. Its once clear surface now clouded with dust and streaked with the remnants of failed decontamination efforts. "Cruz, Keller, on me," I ordered, and they fell in line without a word. The entrance to the dome was sealed, the heavy metal door showing signs of recent attempts to force it open. Someone on the inside had tried to escape, but the thick, reinforced alloy had held. The bodies of those who hadn't been so lucky lay scattered around the perimeter, their suits torn open, flesh exposed to the Martian elements. It wasn't the cold that had killed them. Their faces, what was left of them, were shaped into expressions of terror. I keyed in the override code and the door opened. The interior was dark, the emergency lights on. The floor was slick with something that made my boots slip, a mixture of blood and the bacterial ooze that had once been people. Keller gagged, but kept moving. I didn't bother telling him to get a grip. If he couldn't handle this, he was already dead. The colonists had put up a fight, that much was clear. Barricades lined the corridors, overturned tables and chairs piled high in desperate attempts to keep the infection at bay. It hadn't worked. The bacteria had adapted, as it always did. What had started as a microscopic organism had quickly evolved, turning its hosts into mindless, festering carriers, their bodies warping in horrifying ways as the infection spread. We moved silently through the halls, the only sound the soft squelch of our boots in the muck. I checked the scanner. Nothing alive, at least nothing human. The bacteria wasn't done mutating, though. It never was. That's why we were here. We reached the lab at the center of the dome. The door was sealed, but the glass window was shattered, shards littering the floor. Inside, the lab was in chaos, cabinets torn open, equipment smashed, papers scattered everywhere. The bacteria had found its way in, and whatever had happened here, it hadn't been quick. "Cruz, secure the area," I ordered. "Keller, get the samples." Cruz moved to the door, setting up a perimeter while Keller approached the containment unit. The samples were our primary objective, live cultures of the bacteria, taken before the filters had failed. They were the key to understanding how it was mutating and maybe how to stop it. As Keller worked, I scanned the room, looking for anything that might give us an edge. I approached a data terminal, the screen cracked but still functioning. I tapped a few keys, pulling up the last recorded logs. The entries were short, panicked. Scientists begging for evacuation, for some way to stop what was happening. The final entry was incomplete, cut off mid-sentence. They knew, I muttered to myself. They knew, and they left them here to die. Keller had just finished extracting the samples when the sound of shuffling footsteps drifted down the hall. I raised my rifle, signaling Cruz to take cover. Keller froze, with a look of shock as he turned toward the door. "Get those samples secured," I hissed. He fumbled with the case, sealing it. The footsteps were closer now. Cruz and I took positions on either side of the door, our rifles aimed at the entrance. The first figure to emerge was hardly recognizable as human, its flesh mottled and pockmarked, the surface tightly stretched over bulging bones. It stumbled forward, eyes unfocused, mouth hanging open as it gurgled something unintelligible. Behind it, more shapes emerged, all in various stages of infection. Some were still wearing parts of their suits, others were naked, their bodies contorted by the bacteria's consumption. "Hold your fire," I whispered. "Wait for my signal." The creatures advanced, twitching with a noticeable lack of natural movement. One of them, a man with half his face eaten away, sniffed the air, his remaining eye locking onto the lab. His mouth stretched into a creepy grin, and he lurched forward, the others following. I gave the command and squeezed the trigger. The room erupted in gunfire, the sharp crack of the rifles carrying through the corridors. The infected fell, one after another, but more kept coming, their bodies soaking up bullets that should have killed them. I aimed for the head, the only surefire way to stop them. Cruz was methodical, each shot taking down a target with military efficiency. Keller, on the other hand, was firing wildly, his fear driving him to empty his clip in seconds. The creatures were almost on us, their numbers overwhelming. Cruz tossed a grenade into the hallway, the explosion sending a shower of blood and viscera across the walls. The blast bought us a few seconds, enough time to regroup. I ordered Keller to get the samples out while covering him as he bolted for the exit. Cruz and I followed, providing suppressive fire during our retreat. The creatures clawed at the walls and each other in their frantic scramble to get to us. We reached the shuttle just as the door slammed shut behind us, the seals engaging with a sharp noise. The shuttle's engines ignited, lifting us off the ground as the creatures pounded against the exterior. I watched through the rear window as the dome receded into the distance, the infected still clawing at the ground where we had been. Inside the shuttle, Keller was crouched down, clutching the sample case tightly to his chest. Cruz leaned back against the wall, breathing hard but calm, his eyes closed as he processed what had just happened. "Good work, everyone," I said. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got what we came for." No one responded. There was nothing more to say. The shuttle bucked as we broke through the last of the atmosphere, the transition to zero gravity momentarily disorienting. I reached out and gripped the handle beside my seat, steadying myself. The pilot spoke over the intercom again. "Approaching base, ETA 7 minutes. I turned away from the window, my thoughts already shifting to the debrief. Command would want a full report, every detail catalogued and analysed. They'd pick through the data, searching for patterns, weaknesses, anything that could give us an edge against the bacteria. And then they'd send us back out to do it all over again. "We'll be back in quarantine soon," I said, addressing the team. "Standard procedure, 36 hours observation, then we'll be released to quarters. Stay sharp and keep your comms on." Keller nodded absently, while Cruz gave a short grunt of acknowledgement. The quiet settled over us again. As the shuttle approached the base, the automated docking procedures engaged, guiding us smoothly into the hangar. The base was a massive structure, buried in the Martian regolith, designed to withstand the harshest conditions Mars could throw at it. From the outside, it looked like a fortress. Thick walls, heavy blast doors, and only a few narrow windows set high in the structure, more for psychological comfort than any real use. As the shuttle touched down, a team of technicians in hazmat suits rushed forward, securing the craft and preparing for decontamination. The bay doors closed behind, sealing us inside. "All right, let's move," I ordered, unstrapping myself and grabbing my gear. We filed out of the shuttle in silence, the technicians waiting for us at the base of the ramp. They directed us toward the decontamination chambers, where we'd spend the next few hours being scrubbed clean of any potential contaminants. I handed over the sample case to the lead tech, who nodded curtly before sealing it inside a sterile container. The decontamination process was thorough, almost brutal. High-pressure jets blasted our suits with chemicals designed to kill any biological agents, followed by a series of scans that mapped every inch of our bodies for signs of infection. It was invasive, uncomfortable, and absolutely necessary. When it was over, we were escorted to the quarantine wing, a stark, sterile section of the base with individual rooms sealed behind heavy glass doors. The rooms were bare, just a cot, a small table, and a terminal linked to the base's network. We'd be monitored around the clock, our vitals constantly checked for any signs of exposure. I dropped my gear on the floor and sat on the edge of the cot, rubbing my eyes. The exhaustion was setting in, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that came from more than just physical exertion. It was the kind of tired that settled into your soul, a heaviness that no amount of sleep could shake. The terminal on the wall blinked, indicating an incoming message. I tapped the screen, and the face of Colonel Briggs appeared. His expression was as stern and unreadable as ever. A man used to giving orders and having them followed without question. "Captain Wells, I've received the preliminary report from your mission. The samples are being analysed as we speak." "Understood, sir," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Your team did well under difficult circumstances," Briggs continued. "However, there are concerns about the increasing adaptability of the bacteria. We'll need a full debrief to assess the situation properly." "I'll have the report ready by the end of quarantine," I assured him. "But sir, there's something you need to know. The bacteria, it's evolving faster than we anticipated." Briggs' eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign that my words had registered. "Evolving, Captain?" "Yes, sir. The bacteria are responding to our actions, finding new ways to survive and spread. The colonists in Dome 17, they were exposed to the bacteria for less than 48 hours, and it had already developed resistance to their containment protocols." Briggs was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Noted. We'll increase the level of scrutiny in the analysis. In the meantime, your orders remain the same. Contain the outbreak, gather data, and prevent the bacteria from reaching Earth, no matter the cost." "Understood, sir." The screen blinked off. I leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes and letting out a slow breath. No matter the cost, the words replayed in my mind, emphasizing the challenge we endured in this world. I knew what was coming. More missions, more deaths, more sacrifices in the name of survival. And through it all, the bacteria would continue to adapt. The door to my room opened, and a technician in a hazmat suit stepped inside, holding a tray of nutrient packs and water. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until I saw the food. Mars had a way of making you forget the basics, like eating, sleeping, or even thinking straight. "Here you go, Captain," the tech said, setting the tray down on the table. His voice was muffled behind the visor, but I could sense the nervousness in his movements. Everyone was on edge, even the ones who never left the safety of the base. "Thanks," I muttered, not looking up. The tech hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something more, but thought better of it. He left without another word, the door sealing shut behind him. I tore open one of the nutrient packs and forced myself to eat, chewing mechanically. The food was tasteless, but it filled the void in my stomach. I washed it down with the water and pushed the tray aside. There was nothing to do now but wait. Wait for the analysis. Wait for the next mission. Wait for the inevitable call to action. My thoughts drifted back to Dome 17, to the bodies we'd left behind, twisted and broken by the bacteria. They had been people once, men and women who had come to Mars with hope, with dreams of building a new world. Now they were just another statistic in a war we weren't even sure we could win. I lay back on the cot, staring up at the ceiling. The lights were too bright, the air too clean, the silence too stifling. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I replayed the events of the day over and over in my mind, dissecting every decision, every action, every bullet fired. I didn't know how long I lay there, lost in thought. Time had a way of losing meaning on Mars. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I drifted into sleep, haunted by visions of red dust, deformed bodies, and the ever-present threat of the bacteria. I woke to the beeping of the terminal by my bed. My body felt heavy, muscles stiff from the cramped, uncomfortable cot. I rubbed my eyes, willing myself awake, and rolled over to silence the noise. The display flashed with a new message from command, summoning me to the briefing room. It was earlier than expected, but on Mars, schedules were more of a suggestion than a rule. I pushed myself up, stretching the kinks out of my back, and dressed quickly. The quarantine wing was quiet, and the air carried the chemical smell of disinfectants. I stepped out into the corridor and proceeded to the briefing room. The briefing room was as stark as the rest of the base. A long metal table, a few chairs, and a large screen on the far wall. Colonel Briggs was already there, his expression grim as ever. Seated next to him was a civilian in a lab coat, his eyes bloodshot and his hands twitching slightly. A man on the edge. "Captain Wells," Briggs said as I entered. "Take a seat." I sat across from the civilian, who glanced at me with curiosity. Briggs didn't waste time with pleasantries. "This is Dr. Robert Harper, one of the lead scientists from the Scientific Guild. He's been working on the bacteria samples you brought back from Dome 17. Harper gave a brief nod but didn't say anything. He seemed distracted, his mind somewhere beyond the confines of the room. "We've analyzed the samples," Briggs continued, "and the results are concerning. Dr. Harper will explain." Harper finally seemed to snap out of his reverie. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the table. "The bacteria are evolving," he began, his voice low and hurried. "What you encountered in Dome 17 was just the beginning. The samples show signs of rapid mutation, faster than anything we've ever seen." I frowned. "We've known the bacteria were dangerous, but this sounds like something else entirely." Harper nodded vigorously. "It is. This isn't just about resistance to our countermeasures. The bacteria are integrating with the environment, incorporating elements of the Martian soil, the atmosphere, everything." Briggs cut in, his tone as measured as ever. "Dr. Harper believes that this rapid evolution is tied directly to the terraforming process. The bacteria were dormant for millennia, and our attempts to make Mars habitable have awakened them. They're reacting to the changes we're making to the planet." I processed this. "So what does that mean for us, for the colonies?" Harper's eyes locked onto mine, intense and pleading. "It means we're running out of time. If these bacteria continue to evolve, they could become something we can't contain, something that could potentially spread beyond Mars." I'd seen firsthand what the bacteria could do, the way they consumed everything in their path. If they made it off-world... Briggs leaned back, crossing his arms. "Dr. Harper has a proposal. Something unconventional. I want you to hear him out." Harper hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I believe," he began slowly, "that the bacteria can be controlled, maybe even harnessed. If we can understand how they're adapting, we might be able to turn that process to our advantage." I narrowed my eyes, trying to gauge where he was going with this. "Controlled?" You're talking about using the bacteria? Yes, Harper said, his voice gaining strength. The bacteria are incredibly resilient, able to thrive in conditions that would kill any other organism. If we can integrate them into the human microbiome, we might be able to adapt to Mars the way they have. I stared at him, trying to wrap my mind around what he was suggesting. You want to infect people with this thing? Not infect, Harper corrected quickly. Incorporate. It's a radical idea, but it could be the key to survival. Mars is killing us, slowly but surely. But the bacteria are thriving. If we could tap into that, control it, we might be able to save the colonies, maybe even make Mars truly habitable. I glanced at Briggs, who was watching me closely. And what does Command think of this? Briggs sighed, the first sign of weariness I'd seen in him. It's risky, to say the least, but if what Dr. Harper is saying is true, we may not have many options left. The bacteria are outpacing our efforts to contain them. We can't afford to ignore any potential solutions. Potential solutions? I repeated, skepticism creeping into my voice. Or potential disasters. Harper leaned forward, his intensity almost unsettling. I understand your concerns, Captain, but think about it. We could turn this crisis into an opportunity. Imagine a future where humans can live on Mars without relying on fragile domes or constant resupply from Earth. A future where we've adapted to this planet, where we've truly made it our home. I shook my head slowly, trying to process the enormity of what he was proposing. And if it goes wrong? What happens if these bacteria decide we're just another environment to adapt to, another resource to consume? That's why we need to be careful, Harper replied, his tone almost pleading. We need to study them, to understand them. This isn't about rushing in blindly. It's about using our knowledge to guide the process. And if it's a process we can't control, I countered. Briggs cut in before Harper could respond. That's where you come in, Wells. We need someone with experience on the ground, someone who understands the stakes. You'll be overseeing the next phase of this operation. Your job is to make sure it doesn't go wrong. I looked between the two men. This wasn't just another mission, this was something far more dangerous. And yet, if Harper was right, if there was even a chance that we could turn this around. When do we start? I asked finally. Harper's eyes lit up with relief. As soon as possible. We have a facility already prepared, isolated from the main colonies. It's secure, and we'll have all the resources we need. Briggs stood, signaling the end of the briefing. You'll be briefed on the specifics shortly. Get your team ready, Wells. This is going to be a high-risk operation, and I don't need to remind you what's at stake. As I left the room, Harper fell in step beside me, his energy almost infectious. Thank you, Captain, he said quietly. I know this isn't an easy decision, but I believe it's the right one. I didn't respond immediately, my thoughts still focused on the mission ahead. Let's just make sure we're right about that, I said finally, because if we're not, he didn't need me to finish the sentence. We both knew what failure would mean. The stakes had never been higher, and the margin for error was razor thin. The journey to the isolated facility was uneventful, but the atmosphere inside our transport shuttle was tense. Harper sat across from me, his eyes glued to the tablet in his hands, reviewing data with a manic intensity. He muttered to himself occasionally, a stream of technical jargon that I couldn't follow and didn't want to. My job wasn't to understand the science. It was to keep everyone alive long enough for the science to matter. The facility itself was buried deep in a canyon, its entrance concealed by the surrounding rock. The base was a fortress designed to be impenetrable, a final bastion against the hostile Martian environment, and now against the bacteria that had brought us to the brink. We disembarked in the central bay, a large chamber filled with equipment and personnel. The facility had been designed for isolation, and it showed. The walls were thick, the doors reinforced, and every surface was scrubbed clean to a level that bordered on obsessive. "Welcome to our new home," Harper said, his voice tinged with something that might have been pride or madness. It was hard to tell with him now. Get your team settled, I told Cruz. We'll need to establish security protocols ASAP. No one moves through this facility without clearance. He nodded and moved off with the rest of the soldiers. The scientists, meanwhile, were already bustling around Harper, setting up equipment and preparing for the experiments. Within hours, Harper's team had set up the first experiment. The subjects, convicts from Earth promised reduced sentences for their participation, were placed in isolated cells, each one equipped with its own life support system. The idea was to introduce the bacteria gradually, monitoring the integration into their microbiomes. The first few days went surprisingly well. The bacteria seemed to merge with the human hosts without causing immediate harm. The subjects reported increased stamina, reduced fatigue, and a sense of clarity, as if their minds were working faster. Harper was ecstatic, his earlier caution giving way to the belief that he was on the verge of a breakthrough. But I wasn't convinced. The changes were too rapid, too profound. It felt like the calm before the storm. I spent my time in the control room, monitoring the experiments alongside the scientists. The information coming in was fascinating in a terrifying way. The bacteria were thriving, adapting to the human body in ways that were unexpected. The subjects were developing traits that went beyond human norms, and that scared the hell out of me. "Captain, you need to see this," Harper called from his station. I walked over, my eyes narrowing as I looked at the screen. The readouts showed one of the subjects, his vital signs steady, his brain activity spiking. But there was something else. Anomalies in the bacteria's behavior, patterns that suggested they were doing more than just integrating. They were learning. "Is that normal?" I asked. Harper didn't look up. "Normal? No, but that's the point. The bacteria are evolving, finding ways to coexist with the host. This is exactly what we hoped for." "Coexist? Or take over?" I challenged. He finally looked at me, his eyes alight with a fervor that made me uneasy. "Captain, you have to understand. We're on the brink of something incredible. Or catastrophic," I shot back. "What happens if they decide they don't need us anymore?" "Containment breach in Sector 3, a voice announced over the intercom. "All personnel, initiate lockdown procedures." My heart dropped. Sector 3 was where the most volatile bacteria samples were stored, the ones we hadn't dared to experiment with yet. "Seal it off," I commanded, already moving towards the door. "Harper, get your team out of here. Cruz, with me." Cruz was already moving, his weapon drawn, as we ran through the corridors. The facility was a maze designed to contain any outbreak, but it also meant that getting anywhere fast was nearly impossible. When we reached Sector 3, the scene was a mess. The reinforced glass of the containment units had been shattered from the inside, the bacteria seeping out like a living fog. "Jesus," Cruz whispered. "Keep it together," I snapped, forcing myself to stay focused. "We need to contain this." But even as I said it, I knew it was too late. The bacteria were already spreading, moving faster than I'd thought possible. They clung to the walls, the floors, the equipment. Everything they touched began to warp and twist, consumed by the infection. I ordered a retreat toward the main corridor, instructing to seal off the sector from the rest of the facility. As we pulled back, an infected soldier stumbled toward us, his body coated in bacterial ooze. His eyes were frantic and his mouth was contorted. Without a moment's pause, I raised my weapon and fired. The soldier collapsed, but the bacteria continued to advance, inching closer to us. Cruz reported that the blast doors were malfunctioning and that it was impossible to seal them off. In response, a plan was quickly formulated to set charges along the corridor to collapse the entire section if necessary. Cruz paused briefly before proceeding to place the charges. Meanwhile, I assessed our odds of survival. They weren't good. As we worked, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Harper slipping through a side door, something clutched in his hand. A data drive, perhaps? I hadn't trusted him since we got here, and now I knew why. He wasn't trying to save his research. He was planning something worse. I followed him, moving quietly through the side corridors. The facility felt increasingly disorienting, as the bacteria spread and encroached on every surface. The infection seemed to exhibit a disturbing rhythmic quality, while the lights above struggled to stay steady, affected by the bacteria's disruption of the power. I found Harper in the central lab, leaning over a terminal, his face bathed in the light of the screen. He didn't hear me approach, too focused on whatever he was doing. "Step away from the terminal, Harper," I said, my voice low but firm. He froze, his hands hovering over the keys. Slowly he turned to face me. "Captain, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand." I cut him off. "This is over. We're blowing the facility. There's no saving your research." His expression changed into something desperate, almost pleading. "You can't do that. We're so close. The bacteria, they're the key to everything. If we can just control them." "Control them?" I scoffed. "Look around you, Harper. You've already lost control. These things are proliferating rapidly, and you want to release them on the rest of Mars." He shook his head, stepping closer. "No, Captain, listen to me. The MIF, they're coming for us. They want the bacteria too, but they'll use them as a weapon. If we can just..." I felt my heart drop. "You made a deal with Martian Independence Front, didn't you?" He didn't deny it. Instead, his eyes revealed something close to madness. "It was the only way. They promised to help us, to give us the resources we need. But they don't understand. They think they can use the bacteria to control Mars. We have to stop them, but we need the data." "No," I said, raising my weapon. "We need to destroy it. All of it." Harper's hand darted for a weapon on the table. I fired, the shot echoing in the lab. He stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, the weapon clattering to the floor. "It's too late," he gasped. "They're already here." The ground beneath us rocked. The MIF had arrived, their attack triggering the facility's final defenses. I grabbed Harper and pulled him to his feet. He didn't resist, his earlier defiance gone, replaced by a broken resignation. We made our way back to the main corridor, the sound of gunfire and explosions escalating. Cruz was waiting, the charges set. "We're out of time, Captain," he said, glancing at Harper with undisguised contempt. "This place is going down, with or without us." "Then let's make sure it goes down for good," I said, handing him the detonator. "Blow the charges. We'll seal this place off and pray it holds." He triggered the charges, the explosion ripping through the corridor. The walls buckled, the ceiling caving in as the blast tore the facility apart. But the bacteria were seeping through the cracks, moving faster than we could escape. I shouted over the chaos, urging everyone to get to the shuttle immediately. We sprinted forward, feeling the tremors under our feet. As the facility collapsed around us, the bacteria remained ahead, their extensions reaching out for new hosts. By the time we reached the shuttle bay, the situation was dire. The bacteria had breached the bay doors, seeping into the shuttle itself. There was no time to clear it, no time for anything but one last desperate act. I turned to Cruz, who was already opening the shuttle's emergency hatch. "Get Harper out of here. You too." "What about you?" I pulled the detonator from my pocket, my decision already made. "Someone needs to stay behind to make sure it works. Get out of here, Cruz. That's an order." He hesitated just for a moment, then nodded, grabbing Harper and hauling him into the shuttle. I watched as the hatch sealed behind them, the engines flaring to life. The shuttle lifted off, the bay doors struggling to open against the bacteria's advance. As the shuttle ascended, I turned back to the facility, the detonator in my hand. The bacteria were everywhere now, a living tide that consumed everything in its path. But I wasn't afraid. There was no time for fear, no room for doubt. I triggered the detonator. The explosion was massive, a fireball that consumed the entire facility, the shockwave knocking me off my feet. I awoke to the sound of muffled voices and the steady beep of a heart monitor. My body felt heavy, anchored to the cot by a combination of pain and exhaustion. Blinking against the harsh overhead lights, I tried to focus, piecing together the last fragmented memories. The explosion, the shuttle taking off. And then, nothing. "Easy there, Captain," a voice said softly. I turned my head, wincing as a sharp pain shot through my side. A nurse was adjusting the IV in my arm, her expression professionally neutral. "You've been through a lot, just try to relax." Relax. The word sounded foreign, absurd even. There was no relaxation here. I tried to sit up, but the nurse gently pushed me back down. "Take it slow," she advised. "You're in a secure section of the base. You're safe." Safe. Another word that didn't fit. The last place I'd felt safe was a lifetime ago, back on Earth, before Mars had stripped away every illusion of security. "How long?" I croaked. 3 days, the nurse replied. "You've been out for 3 days. They brought you back from the wreckage. It's a miracle you're alive." I closed my eyes, letting the information sink in. 3 days. That was how long I'd been unconscious, while the bacteria, the base, and everything else had either been destroyed or consumed. The last thing I remembered clearly was the explosion. My desperate attempt to wipe the facility off the face of Mars, to stop the bacteria from spreading any further. But had it worked? "Colonel Briggs wants to see you when you're ready," the nurse continued. "He's been waiting for you to wake up." Of course he was. Briggs had been the one to send us on this doomed mission, and now he would want answers, a debrief. They always wanted a debrief, even when there was nothing left to say. "I'm ready now," I muttered, struggling to sit up again. The nurse seemed unsure but didn't stop me this time. She handed me a glass of water, which I drank greedily, the cold liquid soothing my parched throat. "Take your time, Captain," she said as she left the room. "I'll let the Colonel know you're awake." Colonel Briggs arrived shortly after, his presence filling the small room. He was the same as always, rigid, stern, a figure of military discipline. But there was something in his eyes, a hint of concern that hadn't been there before. "Captain Wells," he began, taking a seat beside the cot. "It's good to see you awake." I nodded, not trusting my voice to carry the weight of everything I was feeling. Instead, I waited, knowing that Briggs wouldn't waste time with pleasantries. "We recovered you from the outskirts of the facility," he continued. "It's completely destroyed. Whatever you did down there, it worked. The bacteria have been contained. For now." "For now," I repeated. "What about the MIF, Harper?" "Harper didn't make it," Briggs said, his tone flat. "And as for the MIF, they've pulled back. The explosion took out their strike team, and without the bacteria, they don't have much to fight for." I should have felt relief, but all I felt was emptiness. Harper's face flashed in my mind, ravaged by desperation and madness. He'd been wrong, but so had I. We'd all been wrong. "And the bacteria?" I asked, forcing the question out. "We believe the explosion destroyed most of it, but there are signs that some of it might have survived. We're monitoring the area closely, and the base is on high alert." I closed my eyes, fighting the surge of hopelessness. The bacteria had proven too adaptable. We'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. "There's something else," Briggs said after a moment. "We found this on you when we brought you back." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the data drive, the one Harper had been so desperate to protect. My heart sank. I'd forgotten about it in the chaos. Harper's research, the key to everything, or so he'd believed. And now it was in my hands, a Pandora's box that I wasn't sure I wanted to open. "What do you want to do with it?" Briggs asked. I stared at the drive, turning it over in my hand. It was so small, so innocuous, but the power it held. For a long moment I was silent, weighing the decision. Destroy it, and we might lose any chance of understanding the bacteria, of finding a way to truly defeat them. But keep it, and we might be opening the door to something worse. Finally, I handed it back to Briggs. "Lock it away, somewhere safe, and don't let anyone near it." He took the drive, nodding slowly. "I'll see to it personally." With that he stood, the conversation over. But before he left, he turned back to me, his expression softening just slightly. "You did what you had to do, Wells," he said quietly. "It wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean, but you made the right call." I didn't respond, just watched as he walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The days passed in recovery and debriefings. I went through the motions, answering questions, giving reports, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the events over and over. The explosion, the bacteria, Harper's desperate pleas, each memory was a wound that refused to heal. On the 5th day, I was finally cleared for duty, though I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The base was secure, the bacteria contained, but the sense of impending doom hung over everything like a dark cloud. I found myself drawn to the edge of the base, where the barren Martian landscape stretched out as far as the eye could see. The sky was a dull, reddish-brown, the sun a faint, cold light in the distance. It was a barren place, and yet it held a strange beauty, highlighting how small and fragile we were in the grand scheme of things. As I stood there, staring out at the wasteland, I thought about the future. Not just my future, but the future of Mars, of humanity. We had come here with such high hopes, determined to conquer this planet, to make it our own. But Mars had other plans. It wasn't going to be tamed, and neither were the forces we had set free. Harper's words replayed in my mind, his belief that the bacteria were the key to our survival. Maybe he'd been right, in a way. Maybe we needed to change if we were going to survive here. But not like this. Not at the cost of our humanity. There was still so much we didn't understand, so many questions left unanswered. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A faint glow, just at the edge of the horizon. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. A tiny patch of soil radiated with a familiar light. The bacteria. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the glow. The bacteria were still out there, still adapting. I forced myself to turn away, to walk back to the base. There was nothing more I could do now, but the sight of that glow would stay with me. As I re-entered the base, the doors sealing shut behind me, I knew that Mars had changed me, just as it had changed everyone who came here. We were all infected in a way, not with the bacteria, but with the knowledge that survival on this planet would always come at a cost. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Mars wasn't done with us yet.